Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we are going to be talking about reflection essays with a particular focus on the reflection essays in Core 115. If you're just joining us, please do introduce yourself in the chat. I'd like to know where everyone is from. We have a geographically dispersed set of people at ACU, and it's always nice to know where people connect from. I've been fortunate to live around the country in a few places, and so I see Tennessee dialing in, and I say, oh, awesome, I used to live in Chattanooga and teach at the university there. And I see New Mexico coming up, and I remember the last conference that I went to in person before the pandemic. It was in Albuquerque, and of course, people coming from Texas. So please let us know where you're joining from and how things are going on your side. So if you are new to the Writing Center, we work with students at many different points in the process. We can work with you when you're just looking at instructions for an assignment and wondering, hold on, what is that actually asking me to do? Or you could have a partial draft, a sentence, a paragraph, pages, or a complete draft that's being written, perhaps even submitted for feedback, and you're now responding to what your faculty has commented on. Always happy to work with you. And I will say we do not charge for any of our services at the Writing Center. I mention this because some of our peer universities do. Uh, when I was working for a university in Los Angeles, we decided to research our peer institutions, and we found that one was charging $60 an hour to go to the Writing Center. And I don't know about you, but I would probably go to the Writing Center less. Here at ACU, it is included in your tuition. It is a perk that you have available. And also, in addition to what we provide at the Writing Center, which I'll tell you more about in a moment, we also have an institutional subscription to tutor.com, which has 24-hour access to tutors. So if you are working on a paper at 3 in the morning and you really want feedback on your writing right at that moment, you could log on to tutor.com, sign in through ACU, and then get feedback for up to 10 hours per term through that service. So we have many different resources. We realize that people have different schedules, and when they're available might not always align with when we're doing things, which is why we not only have our regular Writing Center services and the tutor.com subscription, but also webinars such as this. We always record them and make them available on the Writing Center website and on our YouTube channel. So if you have to go partway through, or you see a webinar that you're interested in, but you can't make it, that's all right. Just send us an email or sign up for it. And anyone who signs up for a webinar automatically will get a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording. So looking through here, I think it's probably not a surprise that Texas is winning in terms of the people in this room today. Glad to have you all here. Let me tell you a little bit about the Writing Center, since it's the start of a term and some of you may not have come to one of our things before. So most students work with the ACU Online Writing Center through what we call asynchronous appointments. Asynchronous just means not in real time. So for an asynchronous appointment, you sign up for an appointment through our scheduling system. By the time your appointment rolls around, you upload a copy of your paper, and we will go ahead and send you feedback via email, normally under 24 hours. So you could be working up till 11:30 at night, and then upload your draft for your 11:30 appointment, go to bed, and then know that we're going to look at your paper and send you feedback via email. You don't have to wait up for that. You don't have to be asking lucid questions. If you do have things that you would like to ask in real time, and some people it's a matter of preference, sometimes you're expecting that there'll be a lot of back and forth things, that's okay. You can request a real-time appointment either via phone or Zoom. And for that, you just go ahead and send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. Now we have lots of resources, including course paper templates, sample papers, and more at the Online Writing Center website. And just to review that process, you go ahead and sign up for an appointment at WC Online. And then by the time your appointment rolls around, you submit a draft for us to look at, and then we send you feedback normally within 24 hours. If you are having an appointment, say on Easter weekend, well, Might take a little bit longer than 24 hours, but we will get back to you well in time for you to use the feedback before you have to submit. We've got a lot of webinars targeting different programs and more general things, and these are all listed on the Writing Center website, and there's a complete catalog of the webinars we've offered in the past. So just because you don't see something on the schedule for the current term doesn't mean that you can't watch it now. As an example, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here to show you the Writing Center website, and it's the webinar page. So you should see, rather than the slide, you should now be seeing my web browser where I've got the Writing Center website open. And you'll see we have how to get to the webinars. We have a chronological list of all of the webinars that are coming up this term. But also, after that, we have a catalog of our past webinars. So if, say, you wanted to, you know, work with SPSS, we've got a webinar on that. You could watch the recording right now. Let's say your instructor tells you, oh, you should work on your APA. I took some points off for this. Then you can go to our catalog and go right to the Intro to APA 7th edition webinar and watch it right now. We have some students who will watch our webinars just sitting at the computer. Some will watch it lying on the couch. Some who will listen to them while driving. Listening to driving is great. Please do not watch them while you are driving. But whatever works for you, many people, a little reinforcement, hearing it again helps them understand and retain better. And that's certainly okay. If that's your learning modality, you are more than welcome to watch or listen to them. All right, let us go ahead and dive into our main focus today. We have three primary objectives today. One is to understand the purpose of reflection papers, or to put it another way, to understand reflection papers as a genre of writing. We also are going to delve into, that should be Core 115's Week 1 assignment, reflection essay, A Moment of Meaning. And then we will finish with a discussion of best practices for outlining. So let's start with reflection papers. And if you're wondering, why are we going to look at the genre? Well, if you're taking Core 115, reflection papers come back a lot. And they come back in more than one form. So what is a reflection paper? Well, this is a genre of writing where you delve into your personal responses to selected material. It could be a movie, could be assigned reading, it could be an experience you had, a belief, or even a profession that you have selected. You might also understand it as this is an opportunity to mix a personal approach where you say I, me, and my statements about yourself with formal or scholarly observations about something. There are many different subgenres of reflection papers. There are educational reflection papers, for example, where the purpose is to record and explain your responses to the material and provide informed commentary and clear reasoning. If you've ever read a biblical exegesis, and this comes up in the BIBO classes, for example, about the Old Testament and the New Testament, you know that much of the reading there is saying, okay, so let's look at scripture and let's explain what this means. Let's talk about the historical context, what this word was in Greek, for example, or in Hebrew. And the idea is by reflecting on the material and grounding it in this knowledge, commentary, this explanation, that we will edify the reader and explain something. Now, a lot of film reviews are like this. They're responding to material and they're telling you commentary like, oh, this scene is a tribute to this other thing, or this part of the film is dull, or this has, this is just thrilling to watch. That kind of commentary as well as analysis. How does, say, watching the movie Hidden Figures, which is about the Apollo moon missions and racism, what does that tell us about principles of leadership or understanding and threads in our society, for example? You might also have professional reflection papers, where the purpose is to look at a behavior or events using the perspective of someone who is in that field and say, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this show? What should we keep in mind based on this? And there's a lot of that when you're reading film analyses that you might write in, say, a leadership program or a counseling program, where you're looking at the character and saying, okay, if this person walked into my office, or if they were referred to me as a client, what would I do? Or what do we understand about them, where using this example will help us understand a larger principle. There are also personal reflection papers. And the main purpose of a personal reflection paper is to express your personal or individual feelings on a topic and to explain how and what they are, and also why they are. And this is especially true if you're talking about things of an intimate or delicate nature. And there's a lot of self-assessment that gets done in these. And if you've peeked ahead in the syllabus for Core 115, you'll probably recognize that there are a lot of personal reflection papers that you will be writing. Now, we're looking at this and saying, okay, well, we've got the week 1 assignment that says reflection essay, a moment of meaning. And yes, this is a reflection on a specific moment, what it means to you, and how this helps you to understand who you are. But there's also the week 3 assignment, the Here I Stand selfie video essay. And this is an assignment where you're taking the material that you wrote or that you will be writing for the week 1 reflection essay, and you're updating it based on the feedback and you're adapting it to the video medium. So it is a video reflection essay that is revisiting that same moment that you'll be dissecting and analyzing in this week's assignment. There's also week 4. You write a letter to your younger self where you are reflecting on how you were at an earlier stage of your life. And the final assignment for the course, the spiritual reflection paper, the epistemic humility assignment, where you're looking at how you yourself engage with comfort and discomfort. And each of these assignments has slightly different guidelines about what you're supposed to be doing. This week's assignment, you will be required to use a couple scholarly sources. Week 7, you are not, and that has to do a little bit with how you're describing yourself and how you are grounding it in what other people have said and wrote. So what makes a strong reflection paper? Well, first of all, a clear sense of organization. You could have the exact same content, but if it's not in a order that makes sense, where it's clear why you are presenting the information, it will come across very differently. Specific examples, that is especially true when you're talking about yourself, because you know what happened in your life, but your reader needs to know what happened, probably when it happened, and then what happened next, or where did you go from there. You also want to have a balance of objective observations, which will be probably being grounded in citations, and subjective observations, where you are explaining your reasoning through your own logic by describing your own emotions and other things like that. You want to overall connect this back to the purpose of the paper, because when you write a paper, you're always looking to convince your reader of something. Now, if you never come back to that, they may connect the dots the way you want them to, or they might not. They might just go, not sure what that was about, and move on. So you do want your paper to not only start out with telling your reader what you're going to convince them of, but coming back at the end and in some shape or form saying, all right, so here's what I've told you, and so now you should be agreeing with me. More on that in a little bit. So let's delve into the specifics of this assignment. So again, we're talking about Core 115's Week 1 Assignment 1, the reflection essay, A Moment of Meaning. So I have extracted the instructions for this assignment and slightly reformatted them, but I haven't changed the text itself, just a little bit about how it's arranged and formatted. So this instruction, it starts with a preamble. And, let's go ahead and briefly look at the web page itself. So you can see here, we have this little note at the top. The student will demonstrate a critical awareness of social location. Because that's one of the big picture things that your paper is supposed to do. We'll talk about more what that means in a moment. But you have some additional explanation of the purpose, why are we asking you to do this, and some things that you should be thinking about, and then two specific sets of instructions about what should be in your paper. And then there's a rubric at the bottom. So I have reformatted these two slides so that we can focus in on specific aspects of it without being distracted by the rest. All right, so the student will demonstrate a critical awareness of social location. So what does that mean? Well, social having to do with society, with interactions with other people, location, where we are. Now, besides just wanting to know where everyone is joining us from, because I think it's cool that we have students who are all over the country. And by the way, if you just joined us, please do introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from geographically. Besides all that, it is something that is very helpful to understand how our context may or may not feed into where we are, how we react with other people, how other people react to us. As an example, I once had the occasion of traveling in an area where, shall we say, it was far from the southern border. And someone was talking about how they had seen someone in a store. And they were speaking a language that was other than English. And they were talking about how they were so curious about what these people were saying because they were wondering, what could they be talking about that they were deliberately speaking into this other language. Now, I happen to know because I'd been in that same store and that they were referring to the people talking in Spanish. Now, I lived in a number of different parts of the country. I lived in Southern California, in San Diego for many years. Hearing people speaking multiple languages on the street is nothing nothing out of the ordinary in San Diego. Just like how in Dallas or Houston or all these other places, you will meet lots of bilingual people and lots of people who grew up speaking a different language at home and do it in their everyday life. Nothing wrong with that. But if that's not something you're accustomed to, not something that's normal for you, you may have a different reaction, even if that's just saying, that's weird, or that's not something I'm used to. As another example, when I lived in Boston, while I was on the light rail, on the metro transit system, I would often hear Russian, German, French, Italian, Spanish, Hebrew, and other things. Now, if I was hearing all of those languages on the train where I am right now in Minnesota, I would be surprised and I'd be wondering, is there a conference in town? I don't normally hear half these languages. And so whether it is a reaction of surprise or confusion or something else, that is an example of how context may drive our experiences. So when this assignment says, demonstrate a critical awareness of social location, it's asking you in part to say, okay, well, who are you, where are you, and how do these things affect each other? All right, let's go a little bit deeper here. So the purpose of the assignment is to orient you to the practice of reflection. Okay, great. Much of what we will invite you to do throughout this course is to thoughtfully and attentively reflect on your life and context. Now, do note here that it says attentively reflect. So not just state, oh yes, I am Basil Considine and I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and let me give you a rundown of my life. That would be summarizing my life and context. Some summary is good, but we want to have some reflection where you say, okay, well, here's what this means, or here's how that's important to me. So let's come back to that in a moment. We believe that reflection is a path toward mindfulness, greater presence in the world, and deep learning. Now, this isn't just an idle comment. This is the instructor telling you, in part, here are some things that you should be talking about. We believe that reflection is a path toward mindfulness, greater presence in the world. So, how does your understanding of your experience and where you are help you to be mindful of things and make you more present, active in the world that surrounds you? What have you learned from this? Because, as this last sentence says, this exercise will help you develop that important skill. It's designed to help you do these things, so you want to write about them so your instructor knows you're thinking about them. Spend a few minutes reflecting on a recent moment in your life that was meaningful. This could be any moment that happened at home, work, faith community, or your neighborhood or community that produced any of the following experiences, such as joy, laughter, hope or delight, connection with a core passion or sense of identity, connection with another person, a sense of accomplishment, contributing to the common good, connection with God, or any other emotion or experience you would identify as positive. So, this is a list of examples that you can talk about. And I would recommend making sure you talk about several of them, but probably not all, because as we will see later, uh, there's a length given for this paper, and if you're doing all of these in any detail, you'd probably be exceeding that length. All right. Now, these next sets are giving specific instructions of what you should be writing about. And I'm going to make a suggestion: the order that you should be writing at them. Because if you think about how a paper is graded, there's a list of things that should be in the paper, and there's a list of standards about how these things should be. These are the instructions of the rubric together. And when you are grading a paper, the easiest way to grade it is when you look at something and say, oh, that's there, check. That's there, check. That's there, check. That's there, check. And to just check them off in the order that they're written in the instructions and in the rubric. If you write them in a different order, it's possible that someone will say, well, okay, they got to they wrote who was involved, and they wrote how did the experience affect them, but they didn't really talk about what they were doing. And even if you've buried that, say, at the end of the paper, well, if it's not in the order they're expecting, it's easier to miss. And the argument probably won't connect in the way that the instructor is expecting you to do this and guiding you to do that. So follow the order that you have here. So who is involved? What were you doing? How did the experience affect you emotionally? Avoid generalities and only narrate one story. Now, a story may have multiple parts, but this is a very specific instruction saying focus on one story, whether that's, say, the arc of a day or a number of recurring events. Just make sure that you give us one story and then it's clear what that story is. All right, part 2. And you'll see just from the length, the part 1 is 300 to 400 words. Part 2 is double that, 600 to 800. Part 2, reflect on why this moment was meaningful by responding to all 3 of the bullet points below. So that's a directive. That's saying what follows isn't a suggestion, it's a directive, it's a requirement. Answer these questions, and again, answer them in the order that they're given. So what does this experience say about who you are and how you are wired? What particular longings, gifts, or passions might this experience highlight? And what does this experience say about your context? And what can you learn about the world around you and those with whom you shared the experience? And bullet 3, what does this say about how you connect with God? Do you see this as an experience of the transcendent? If so, how? How would you see God's involvement in meaningful moments? Be sure to include 2 to 3 references from the readings, videos, and course content. So it's not just going to be idle reflections. The instructor has included the specific note. You should have some references that you are citing to ground your reflection in the things that you are reading this week. And we have the rubric here, which pretty much goes through what the instructions say in a briefer form and a more of a big picture one. Okay, you must describe 1, and it says exactly 1, so don't give 2, you will lose points. Describe 1 story of meaning, providing sufficient details and avoiding generalities. All right. Student reflected on the story of meaning by identifying implications for their identity, context, and experience of God. All right. Now, if we look at those two, that's 70 points out of 100. That's 70%. So don't miss out on those ones because it's a big amount of the grade, big portion of the grade. And then you'll see that 30 points or 30% goes for, is this written clearly? Does it look the way it's supposed to be? Has it been proofread? All right, so this is one of those reminders. You want to spend a moment to check your work before you turn it in. Make sure that you run spell check and all that stuff, because that's the difference between an A and a C. All right, so let's talk about best practices for outlining before we dive into outlining the specific assignment. So in general, you want to not do extra work. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just go ahead and copy the assignment instructions. It'll give you a very clear guide about what your instructor has said they want you to write. Don't write more than you need. So if we start with the approximate idea of how long each section should be, or each portion within the section, that helps you make sure you're writing what you need to do this well, no more and no less. Take note of the sources you need, because if you know that you're going to need, say, 2 or 3 scholarly sources to ground your reflection before you do the reading, then you can do the reading with that list. And when you see something that matches what you need, you can say, oh, I'm going to plug this in here. I'm going to cite this source as part of my explaining this thing here. Expand your outline as you go. You can always start in a very big picture form and add additional levels for paragraphs and sentences as you go along. Speaking of which, as you go along, don't forget to ground your argument with citations. Keep in mind that APA style does allow you to reference your experiences, but it's usually most convincing when you're aligning it with the literature. Say, this author cited this thing as a reason for doing this thing. This aligns with my professional experience doing this for so many years, where I noticed this other thing. All right, now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a copy of our APA course paper template. If you're not familiar with the APA course paper template, I developed this when I was hired at the ACU Writing Center because I noticed that many students were doing all the formatting to get just the basics of the paper looking right, that they were doing this by hand, and that there were often little mistakes that were creeping in that were causing them to lose points. And I said, you know what? We all should be starting with a standardized template that makes a lot of the stuff easy and helps us make sure this looks all the ways that we should. So I'm going to go ahead and share a copy of that, and then I'm going to explain how the template works. All right, now I went ahead and downloaded a copy of the course paper template from the Writing Center website. And the first time that you see that, it will look something like this. And you will see that there are instructions in comments in the right-hand side, and that there are areas to fill things in. And usually the first thing that students will do is they will look around, say, okay, I understand the instructions, I understand the comments. And then they will go ahead and delete those comments and delete all the placeholders and put in their name. So I'll show you how to do exactly all of that. If you go to the Review tab, and then under New Comment, there's this button, Delete. Select Delete all comments in document. Boom, they're all gone. All right, now next up, in some advanced undergraduate courses and graduate courses, you're required to have an abstract page. Not for this particular assignment, not for this course. So we'll just take that out. And then we've got this placeholder here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that as well. Same thing, you should always have a references page in APA style, and we'll just take out all the placeholders here. All right, so now we have a blank copy of the template, and we're going to now start filling things in here. Now, APA style is one of several major writing styles that you might encounter or have heard of before. These include the Modern Language Association's MLA style, the University of Chicago's Chicago Manual of Style and its derivative Turabian, the American Chemical Association, American Nursing Association, and in our case, APA, the American Psychological Association's system of formatting things. At ACU, basically all of the classes, basically all of the online classes, except for those in the Graduate School of Theology, use APA style and has particular rules about how you refer to things. You should be very specific, be very objective, and also very concise. So, what do I need to call this paper? Well, you can give it many titles, but because it emphasizes as preciseness, we can just call it the assignment. A moment of meaning reflection paper. And it's not a fancy title, but it is an accurate, precise, and concise title, and those are important things in APA style. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put in my name here. Now I'll put in my affiliation. You can put in your degree program. And then the course would be Core 115, instructor date. You can fill that in on your own. All right, now here, this is the same exact title. So don't give an abbreviated form, just give the exact same one. And then we start writing. Now, I mentioned that we want to start by just copy and pasting the assignments here, the assignment instructions. So I'm going to do exactly that here. I'm going to paste. And I do want this to look right to look right in the template. So if you paste anything and you see, well, the font isn't quite right and it just looks a little off, go ahead and make sure you select Match Destination Formatting. And immediately that looks a bit more like the rest of the paper because the font is matching and other things like that. And now I'll go ahead and I'll start turning this into a bulleted list using the bulleted list tool in Word. And anytime there's sub-questions here, I'm going to make that a sub-bullet because that's a discrete question that I should be answering. And in some cases, you might move a big picture comment like this to be together. And now let's go ahead and look at this next section. All right, so we have two sets of questions. And then these are sub-questions. And then a general note to include these two references. Now, before we go any further with the references and the citations, I want to bring something to your attention. So ACU, since last year, we have been using APA 7th edition. And there's some different ways that APA 7th edition formats references. So we'll look at an example from the course here. So I'm going to go back to the course website here, and I'm going to modules, and let's pull up the week 1 module. Now, if we go to week 1 readings and resources, let us say that I decided I was going to reference and cite Malala's Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this material to save a little bit of time. All right, so I'm going to go back to the Word document. All right, if you cannot see the Word document right now, please let me know. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into my references area, because every source that you cite should be in the reference area. Now I'm going to go ahead and just look through this and see how this looks. Now, your references follow basic order. Who wrote it? When was it published? What's it called? And how to find it. So who wrote it or presented this? In this case, this is a PBS NewsHour broadcast. And at the end of each of these major items, I put a period. So PBS NewsHour, period. When was it published? Now, in APA, a 7th edition, we don't go ahead and abbreviate the month. We just spell it out. 2014, comma, December 10th. Okay, great. We only want one space after punctuation. This is the title of the video. The title of the video should be in sentence case. And this is Malala's name. This is a proper noun for the prize she got. Great. And then rather than video file, we just write video in APA 7. And we do not include the access date. Instead, we just give the URL. So if I were to open that up from the class website, you'll see that the link takes me to YouTube. All right, so we have a YouTube video link here.
I'm proud, but in fact, I'm very...
Now, if we scroll down, we see, oh, yes, PBS NewsHour, that's the channel name. So that's what we put as the author for the source. They're presenting this. It's their channel on YouTube, so they get listed as the author. And we also have this share button here. So I click on share, and that will give me a link that I can copy. All right, so now back to the Word document. So we'll replace this instruction with the name of the platform, which is YouTube, and then the link. So this is how the reference looks in APA 7, which we're now using in all the courses in ACU. All right, so we've got that. And now how would we cite it? Well, we would cite it using the author, which here is PBS NewsHour, a comma, and then the publication year, the 2014. All right, so now that we've checked that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cross out these instructions because I've seen, okay, I don't need them anymore. But I do want the reminder to include at least 2 or 3 references. I'll mark those off as they're used. All right, so I want an example here. Would someone volunteer just the name of a type of experience? It could be a birthday party. It could be something at work. It could be getting hired. It could be graduated. Give me an example of something to talk about, and I will make up an example to use in this paper. You can type this in the chat room, or you can send me a private message. Either is fine. I just would love a couple examples so I can latch on and customize this to the group here. Okay, thank you. I have an example here. A couple more will help me fill this out, so if you wouldn't mind sending this to me, but let's start with the first example. So the experience that someone volunteered is being an astronaut. So I'm going to run with this. I'm going to present this reflection paper as if I had been an astronaut on a space mission. Okay, so at this point, we want to just start filling things in here. And I'm going to write it in italics just because that'll help with the seeing what is what here. And, ooh, celebrating 50 years of marriage. Great example. All right, you know what? I'm going to go with that for a moment. We'll see if we have time for the working the astronaut in there. This could be a happily retired astronaut. Okay, uh, so what would you do? Well, tell us first what you're telling the reader. The experience, uh, or an experience, because we've probably had more than one, is very meaningful to myself and that I have chosen to reflect on. Now, the goal right here is to just get out some information to have it be a direct response to the prompt so the reader knows exactly what they're getting. An experience that is very meaningful to myself and that I've chosen to reflect on is celebrating my 50 years of marriage. Okay, great. We can always tweak it later, but we're just trying to get the ideas out now and make sure that we're filling out this outline. All right. Who is involved? Well, we can just type it in here. This marriage, uh, then you can list whoever's there. Right, what were you doing? Now, it's important when you're answering the question, what were you doing, that you give information that helps ground the reflection, but is not distracting details. So if I said, we held a party in such and such a cove of slip number 43 on Lake Minnetonka, that's a bit more detailed. We don't need to know the exact slip that the boat was tied up on. But knowing that it was on a lake or on a specific lake, I mentioned this one because it happens to be the largest lake in the greater Twin Cities metro area. That helps ground the reader and say, oh, okay. And in this case, because not everyone will know what Lake Minnetonka is, as I'll give some explanation. Our traditional go-to place for celebrations and mourning. All right, now you can always put in more detail there, but we're just trying to get the big picture of understanding, okay, what are the most direct answers to these prompts that we'll then follow up on later. We want to make sure we're covering all of the bases first. Now, here is where things can go in a very different direction. Because depending on how those 50 years of marriage are going and how well the event is going, this could be wonderful or terrible or something in the middle. So I'm going to write about something that hopefully will not happen to you or has not happened to you. This experience was very trying emotionally. And because trying emotionally, although I know what that means, it does kind of leave you taking a moment like, wait, what does that sentence say? The reason it does that is that we have this adverb, emotionally, which is supposed to modify a verb. So if you put it in front of the verb it modifies, we get, oh, it was very emotionally trying. Okay, now we know immediately what that means. So a little order does a lot of good there. All right, this experience was very emotionally trying because, and I'm going to just pull some little bits from local news here. Hopefully, this has not happened on a lake near you. Now, I hope that if you celebrate a 50th at the wedding anniversary, that it does not go like this. But again, we're trying to illustrate how the experience affected you emotionally and to uh, ground this with details so the reader understands what's going on. So it's not just reporting, but it's also explaining what that did or how it affected it emotionally. Um, though my sister in law was not surprised, I was very upset with him, and so this is explaining how did the experience affect you emotionally. Okay, great. And you could continue and add more detail and more layers and talk about how other people did or didn't contribute to this. And but at some point you need to move to the reflecting on why. And here we want both a big picture, one sentence response, as well as responding to all these other questions here. Now let's talk about length a little bit. How long is 400 words? Well, here's a rule of thumb for you. A paper written using our template, with 1-inch margins, 12-point font, double spacing, is going to be about 250 words. So really 300 to 400 words is going to be somewhere around 1 1/3 to 1 2/3 of a page. So in practice with these three paragraphs here, if each of these is a paragraph, that will get us somewhere around that. Maybe 1 to 2 paragraphs on the how part, because that is a significant aspect of this section. All right, so this next one, we're reflecting on this. Well, 600 to 800 words, that's going to be somewhere around 2 1/3 to just over 3 pages. So that's going to be more substantial. And we have essentially 6 bullet points here. So to reach that length, we want each of these to probably be 2 to 3 paragraphs in length. Actually, no, more like a 1 to 2. And one of the things you want to look is to see, okay, is there anything else that you should be writing as you go? And so if this is 1 to 2, 1 to 2, 1 to 2, 1 to 2. Now, this one here, do you see this as an experience with the transcendent? This looks like it could easily be much longer. So let's say 2 to 3 paragraphs here. All right, so now looking at this, we can see, okay, so where are we going to talk about this? And, well, let's just start with the big picture. um, well, hopefully your reflection is different from this, but here's the one I'm going with for our example. This moment was meaningful to me. You want to, when you're responding to a prompt, use some of the same wording, the same phrasing of the prompt, so that it's clear that, oh, I'm responding to that why this moment was meaningful to me question, big picture with one introductory sentence. This moment was meaningful to me because even after this very trying day, when I got home and got to bed, I realized that I was very happy that all my family and friends had chosen to spend the day with me. And once you've given that reflection, then going into all of these smaller things here comes with the understanding that this is fitting together with that realization. So giving the big picture makes all these things make more sense. Why are you mentioning that? Because it's explaining different aspects of it. Now, you don't need to write everything off the bat. You can start by just giving yourself uh, some notes here in bullet form. So longings, gifts, passions. Well, I yelled at them. Temper. uh, Gifts, family and friends at older age. Longings, community, being with other people. And you might then go and say, okay, well, I've started writing things down and I'm realizing I'm getting a bit of a list. So let me start classifying them. Okay, longings, that includes the community and being with other people. Gifts, all right, that includes family and friends at older age. Temper, that's probably not a gift. So let's put that under passions. And so you can keep filling this out, and the more things you think of to put in there and that you can support, the easier it will be to write the paragraph or paragraphs because you'll have a whole list of ideas to draw on. And as you go through the readings for this course module, you may see things where like, oh, yes, I do recognize that in that experience. Let me go ahead and put that in my outline now. And by doing this, when you do sit down to write the exact sentences, you'll have basically all the notes in front of you about what you should be writing about. Now, to go with that question, what can you learn about the world around you and those with whom you shared the experience? Well, that's going to be very subjective because that's about your experience. And remember, this allows you to not only talk about yourself, but also to bring in other sources. So I'm not going to spoil Malala's talk here because if you haven't seen it, it is a very powerful one. But if you did decide that you were going to be citing that in reference, uh, that you might introduce this with something that says, "Oh, and so even though I don't know exactly what I'm going to write here, I know, oh, I'm going to plan on comparing my personal experience of having this different response after the event to how Malala reflected on her own experience. And I know that because I'm referring to that experience, which I've only consumed through that YouTube link, that I'm going to be citing that YouTube video, and that's where the PBS NewsHour thing comes in. So you can and slot in the different sources you are using, and then do a quick visual check and make sure that you are doing at least those 2 to 4 citations that the instructions ask for. So that's about all the time we have today. So does anyone have any questions before we wrap things up? Anything that you'd like me to explain or talk about in additional detail? Um, I do have a couple remarks where I had asked the professor about things that happened in this course and kind of tendencies, anything that people miss more often than others. And a common issue is when you don't pay attention to the lengths here. Again, 600 to 800 words, that's going up to a little bit over 3 pages. So you want to keep things in mind that that's going to be around 3 pages of writing, and this is going to be about half of that. So if you spend too much time describing the experience, if you say take 3 pages on that, you're not going to have a whole lot of time to get in the other thing. There won't be a lot of reflection because you put in too many details. And remember, the instructions say narrate one story. So we want to focus on one thing, which might involve multiple events, but it still comes together as one story. To go with the other example for this next part, so let's say that you were writing as an astronaut who has gone on the Apollo mission and gone to the moon. There's that famous. Oh, sorry. Well, one quick question. Yes, so the paper does have to be double spaced. In APA style, your paper should always have 1 inch margins, be written in a 12-point font, and be double spaced throughout. That's a general APA requirement. So since this paper requires that you use APA style, it's always going to be double spaced unless your instructor has given you a specific instruction saying don't do that. It defaults to double spaced. Excellent question. So going back to the astronaut part. So I was writing a reflection paper and I had been one of those astronauts on that mission. Well, there's this famous photo of the Earth taken from the Apollo spacecraft called the Blue Marble. And it's the first picture that showed the Earth entirely surrounded by space. And so if that was my moment, I could talk about just that instant, or I could to talk about it in the context of the story of going up into space. And you'd probably want that going up into space to be the larger story that you tell, because then you can talk about, oh, well, and how after we'd done that and we came back, here's how I felt about my fellow crewmates. Here's how the Earth felt seeing it from above, seeing that there's a lot of space out there. And then move into the connection with God. Well, okay, that could be small details like, okay, did you pray during the journey? Or it could be, how you experience or understand and God's influence, God's powers back on Earth after that other very different experience of going up into space. So the exact details, what story you're telling, and that will vary because you're describing a moment that was meaningful to you. But how you describe it, you want to tell us, well, okay, so what made it meaningful? And that's where that joy, laughter, hope, delight comes in. That's where this list here. And you can certainly have more than one of those reactions. I would say write it down and look for ways to make sure that that is clear when you are writing about this later on. As an example, let's go back to the Word document. When you're describing this in the very first period, you can tell us those responses and say, okay, this made me feel joyful, connected with my family, and happy in a way that I did not realize that I was missing. And then down in this other part, when I'm talking about how I was very happy that they'd been there despite all the other stuff, uh, and then connect with that, refer to it later. And this is how you create a really strong reflection paper that doesn't just mention things and then move on, but comes back to them and explains, oh, and this is what this meant here, and this is how this has taught me something about myself. So we are now at 7 o'clock, so I have to let you go. Uh, if you joined us partway through, the full recording will be posted to the Writing Center website later this evening and sent to everyone who RSVP'd to the webinar via email. If you didn't RSVP to the webinar, but you would still like a copy of the slide deck and the recording, just type your email address in the chat window or send it to me as a private message, and I'll add you to that list. Thank you for coming. We have many more webinars coming up this term, so if there's one that catches your interest, go ahead and sign up, or just show up when you get the email saying going on now. Have a good evening, everyone.